This afternoon, we're welcoming to the stage Deepti Boddapati. She is a developer with Zeek Studios. She is joining us from Austin, Texas, and she's going to be talking to us today about location-based content discovery. So please give her a welcoming round of applause.
All right. Hi, everybody. So, the title is a mouthful, but let me just say how I came by this and what I do. So, in my day job, for 1 second, this one is it? 1 second. No? Okay. I think it's not working. Okay, that's good enough. Okay. So in my day job, basically I am the equivalent of a monster truck mechanic. I work on really, really big WordPress sites, and they are used by a lot of content creators and writers. And usually they're publishing internationally. So we have all of these rules and, meta boxes and fields and everything like UX-wise to make it easier for them to publish what they want to different groups of people. One thing that I implemented quite a bit of was different kinds of navigational UI based on locational data that content creators entered into the sites. So some use cases for this in the private, for-profit, marketing sphere for the companies that I worked with was things like recommending partners in the area that they would work with, or showing locations that you could go to of a franchise in your area. For a publication, I envision this for a local publication to be something you would use to talk about local businesses that you're reviewing or featuring or highlighting or working with. It also could be used as a way to disseminate coupons digitally and get people to find out what's closest and recommend places for them to go to from your website. So by doing this, by having a space for content creators to save location-based data, it makes it possible for developers to present it in a variety of UIs. I'm going to talk about some average UIs or UIs that are really common that you're probably thinking of implementing right now, or you've probably implemented already. But one thing that I want to have you guys thinking about right now is also like future forwardness of this idea. In the future, or even right now, a lot of voice, assistants and other voice interfaces are integrating searches based on location. So just like Google, searches, we are optimizing our website to be viewed and showed through a Google search. I'm guessing in the next 5 years, we're going to be optimizing our content to be shown in Siri's search results or Alexa search results. So thinking about the data now and warehousing the data now makes it possible to present this data not just in a visual, web-based UI, but also any UI that might occur in the future. So the UI that I'm going to talk about today is the map UI. And for this, it's just, a bunch of points on a map on your website, right? And let's start with the single version, just a single map point, what you would need to do to implement this in a WordPress site. So this is a single map point. To show this on the front end, on a map, you would need to have the latitude and the longitude saved in your database. Now, you can ask your authors to put in the latitude and longitude, but they're like 9-digit long coordinates each one, and I'm pretty sure your authors won't want to do that. So you would need the latitude and longitude. So on the back end, they can just input the address data in a custom field. Just put an address and then just let them put in a custom field right there. This comes in with every WordPress, install. But this isn't a great idea because addresses are pretty finicky things. It's really easy for people to put in the wrong one or to put in one and mean another one. So the best way to do it is to have some back-end validation. And you can do that out of the box with a lot of MetaBox fields. This one is from ACF. You can also create your own if you wanted to. One thing that you can do is with CMB2, that's another MetaBox creator, but it doesn't have a maps field like this. But you can write the code to show the map location, show the coordinates live as the content creator is typing it in. This way, they have a visual validation, and they're like, okay, yeah, that's the place. And I'm not picking something in a different location or anything like that. And this way, if you use the same thing on the front end and the back end, a lot of us are going to use Google Maps on the JavaScript API on the front end to map our data. If you use the same thing on the back end, it's very good because the data structures are going to match up on both sides. Also, there's no lost in translation and stuff like that. You're just using the same technology on both sides. You can also reuse this technology. You can take what you're building for the front end and just put it in the back end. You don't have to rewrite the front end twice. Just have us show up in the admin area as well. So now that we've talked about the single map marker, we definitely want to map multiples in a certain area. And maybe we want to do something, but the challenge will be here, how to choose what we show on the map. Because if, for example, you are a newspaper that is serving a whole metro area, you'll have different neighborhoods, different locations that you're serving. You don't want to show the addresses of everything or the locations of everything on one map. It's a very time-consuming calculation to show on the front end, at least, to plot out all of these things. So you do want to restrict what you're going to show. Another reason you might want to restrict what you're going to show is for specific elements or specific thematic groupings, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But how do we choose what to show? So we want to plot all of these on here and have multiple map markers. And one obvious solution is to show locations within a zip code. So you might have something like this on your website. So find a location near you, go ahead and put in a zip code, and we'll find the location. And this is possible. The way that you would do this in WordPress is to process the address data, then create a custom taxonomy for zip codes, and put each location in a specific zip code. So then you would just do a taxonomy query and show zip codes, or show locations within a zip code, using the zip code as a taxonomy term. But there's some problems with this. It's possible in WordPress, and I have implemented this, but the problem you'll find is that when you're looking at things about zip codes are very specific, and you might remove relevant results. For example, if somebody was in New Orleans and they were at the red dot location right there, if you did it only by zip code, what would happen is that you would only get locations in the French Quarter, just that zip code. Now, obviously, if I was in that location, I would be fine with traveling to anywhere in that circle. So doing it with zip codes means that I will only get results like this. So that's really counterintuitive UX, and it might not even be something that people who are on your website would want. And also the other problem with this is people don't remember zip codes super well. You can't think of like what the next zip code is usually, but if you were in the French Quarter, it's probably really simple for you to remember that Marigny is to the left or to the northwest or northeast of you. But you're not going to remember that it's 00 something something something. So it's just not an easy thing for people who are navigating your website to understand if you do it by zip code. The second obvious solution is to plot items within a radius of the viewer. This is something that I tried as well, and what happens in this case, there's some problems here. One of these is a user permissions problem, which is, people won't want to give you their location. When they see that little button pop up, website wants to know your location, they're feeling suspicious already. You would have to require that they share something with you to use this feature on your website. And also it requires HTTPS. And this is something that could be a talk in and of itself, switching your website over to HTTPS. If you have a large enough content base, or if you have a large enough website, it gets really difficult to switch everything over to HTTPS. So having that as a requirement for this is not so awesome. Then you also have some calculation problems. Every user will usually be a unique address. You could try to generalize. So for example, if you had an apartment number, you could dock the apartment number and just look for the street address. There are some other generalizations you can do. Zip code generalizations is something you can do as well, but again, that has all those zip code associated problems with it. The other thing is because you're not going to get the same same address repeatedly, same inputs repeatedly, it's really hard to cache or do anything to save this kind of query, to do anything to save this kind of calculation. And checking against every location you have in your database could get really expensive, especially if you have a lot of locations that you're reviewing. And so in general, it just requires a lot of time-consuming calculations. And there are calculations that have to be done when the user is asking for the site or asking for the page. It's not something that you can do beforehand and cache or save. So it's going to really impact processing speed and load time. So this is, for these reasons, it's another issue with that. And also, there's this possibility of the illogical user experience. Let me take Austin, Texas, for example. In Austin, this is a single street. It's called 6th Street. And it's broken up into 3 different areas. This is something that locals would know. And if you're a local newspaper, you should probably also know. But the blue district there, it's near office buildings and startups and everything like that. So the restaurants and the bars there are quite nice. They're something that you would be able to take someone to if they were visiting on a business trip. They're a good place for professional meetings and stuff. Then you have the middle part, which is the touristy part of Austin. It's kind of similar to Bourbon Street. It is definitely not a place where you should take anybody. Much less, a business partner or boss or something, or your parents or anything like that. And that part of 6, the last part here, the light blue part, that's the experimental part, I guess. It's for people who like hipster-y kind of things, interesting food, interesting cocktails, interesting atmospheres. And it's also definitely not a place to take maybe family that's visiting. They might be shocked at how strange it is there. So when you're looking at this stuff, it's definitely something that locals would appreciate knowing, or people who are in the area would appreciate knowing. Something that Google definitely can't show you. Oh, no, Google. No, never mind. No. But yeah, it's something that Google would definitely not be able to show you. But it's definitely something that if a local newspaper had this content, it would be of value to people who are visiting and deciding where to go. And so if you were to just do it by radius, of locational radius, you could just be over here and get all of these bars and restaurants in the touristy part of 6th, and you would not necessarily want that. So that's where the illogical UX starts coming in. Another thing it could do is you could be over here on one side of the river, and it could tell you, go to the other side of the river, past the traffic jam and the bottleneck right there. So, that's also something that we want to avoid telling people to do. And it's much better because AIs and everything haven't really caught up, machines haven't really caught up to this, like understanding the nuances of how we pick where we go. It might be better for humans to tabulate what areas to show in what places. And the way you would do that is this solution. You would have a custom taxonomy for logical groupings of locations. So, for example, if you did a custom taxonomy for Austin, and it's a neighborhood custom taxonomy, your content creators could then enter in East 6th, and then touristy 6th, and then upscale 6th. And they can just break it up. And, cities change, things change all the time. New neighborhoods pop up, new areas pop up, and they get a new colloquial name. So having it as a taxonomy that your content creators can adjust and change as time goes on will make it possible for them to react to the changingness of the city and locations and everything. And people who are looking on your map can easily filter by where they want. And usually locals or people there will know, okay, if I wanted this, I will go here, and if I want this, I'll go here. So, let people make that decision, because it's the obvious solution is letting the machine make that decision, but usually the machine won't make a good decision. And this way actually might give a better UX, breaking it up by a custom taxonomy. So one other thing you can do on a map is use a post number as a marker. In this example, we're setting up a map right here. The locations shown on this page are numbered in markers. The way that we had the markers is just by using, a PNG for 1 through 20 and showing that for each one. And then if you click a marker, it will show the card that is related to the marker. So this is one thing you can do. And another thing that after doing a bunch of trial and error, I found is a really good idea, is a card-based display. It's kind of sort of obvious because it's pretty much what maps.google.com will use to show things. They are packaged in cards. And this worked out for us because we were then able to recycle this card UI and use it in other places easily. And we didn't really have to reinvent the wheel as far as design or front-end coding. When every time we used this, the card was discrete and standalone enough that we could use it in a variety of locations. One thing that's different about this card is that it is also showing a static image of the location that we are plotting out here. And the way that you would do this is good if you only have one location to show on a map. you don't actually have to keep querying Google every time you show this image. You can just take the image from Google and save it to your WordPress site. And the way that you would do this in WordPress is there's a bunch of functions associated with creating media attachments on the fly. They're called media sideloads. It's actually a pretty rare kind of function. A lot of people don't know about it, but it comes in really handy with something like this. And you can, when the content creator is entering the the address information, you can right then and there query the static maps API, take the image, save it with a media sideload functionality into your WordPress site, and then attach it to your article. And then you will have this forever. It'll just be like, you can make it a featured image, or you can add it to another meta field, but it's just on your website and you'd never have to do the calculation again. A handy way to use this is also to wrap the image in an A tag with the locational data, so you can click it and then just go to Google, and it just opens up the address in Google, and they can just get the directions through that. So that's a really handy trick that I've used on a lot of sites, and it works out pretty well. And going back to this idea of thematic groupings, so you might want to reuse locations. If you are a local newspaper, you might revisit the same location, the same business several times, or they might be part of different things, different initiatives, different articles that you might write. So, for example, we have these two listicles where we're talking about, best salmon nigiri in Austin, and then best Japanese street food in Austin. And you have the same restaurant referenced in both of them. So you could, if you wanted to, create a separate location entry for each list that you're showing, or you could create a single location entry and associate it with each list. So if you create the separate one, what happens is that you will duplicate the effort for content entry. Every time somebody wants to talk about that restaurant, they'll have to put in the address again and again. And multiple addresses mean that if the business moves, you will have to go in and edit the address in multiple locations and just have to find them all and edit it that way. And you can't do things like, if I entered your website and I was interested, or I was initially led to it because of a certain article, like best salmon sushi, and then I went to that page, I would have no way to know that I could also read about Japanese street food in this location, and I wouldn't be able to click on the location name and then see all of the associated posts and all the associated content that you've created with that. So it really stifles the exploratory part of it, where people go to your website and then they consume all this other content that's related. So what you can do instead is use a custom post type for locations. Save the location once, and then with an articles post type, you can make a connection where you associate the single location with two different articles, or X amount, any articles you want. This way, you will, if the location or the address changes, you would only have to edit one post. You would also be able to, on the single page for this restaurant, you would be able to show all of the associated articles that go with it. And there is an intermediary step to this for WordPress, and the intermediary step is that the only many-to-many connection in WordPress is between taxonomies and posts. So a post can't really have a many-to-many relationship with other posts, but the way to do this is create a custom taxonomy also for your locations. And then every time a post in the custom post type of location gets published, make it so that you're also creating a term in the location's taxonomy that matches up with a post name that you've just created. Then you can associate articles to locations using that taxonomy. So there is a middle step there that you'll have to do in WordPress just because of the way the database is set up. So you can, by doing that single location entry, you have a central place to manage the address, and you can show all the content related to the location on its page. And this also could work for syndicated content if you had a multi-site or if you were using the REST API. Doing it this way means that you could have just one site or one database elsewhere that has some sort of API connected to it or web API connected to it, and you're just pulling the locations from that. You could even dedicate, a whole multi-site to just locations and pull from it. I don't know why you would do that especially, but you could also, have, different microblogs, as in different microblogs, and have the location, shared equally with the microblog. So if you had, for example, a women's themed magazine and a men's themed magazine, you could talk about the same location and talk about the women's haircuts they do there, and then in the men's one, you can talk about the male's haircuts, and you can still have the location in between that is used by both blogs that have a different, domain, different audience, different look, but they're still using this centralized address and location data. So this just ties into this idea of content reuse, which is definitely something that we have to think about when we are doing locational post types. It's something that, if we go into this without thinking about it, it's going to cause problems later on, and it keeps us from being super flexible. For example, one of the first sites that I implemented with locational content, we just had an article, and the article might have had an address to it. And after that content was created, after 100 articles were created, they were like, we want to do, aggregate articles. We want to do articles that mention all these other articles. Well, it was really hard for content creators to go through and find out which locations each one was talking about, and then create that syndicate or that aggregated content later on. And it took us quite a bit to go back and create this custom post type for locations, and then it took a lot of data entry to separate the locations from all the articles that had already been created. And then we were able to implement what we wanted. So doing it right from the beginning would have saved us a lot of time and a lot of data entry for sure. And and that's pretty much it for me. And that's all I wanted to share about this. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Deepti. So yes, I'll come around with the microphone for questions. We do need the microphone so that the questions are picked up on the video. So 1 second.
Okay, so you mentioned zip codes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an area as opposed to a point. Could you do the same with jurisdictions?
Yeah, so the limitation really is just being able to turn that address into a jurisdiction or a zip code. If there's an API that lets you do it, you can do it and separate out the jurisdiction.
So the question, my point goes more to content regarding the area with borders, as opposed to, or in addition to any specific point.
Yeah, so you can definitely do this. Actually, the way you would do this is with the Shapes API. It's it's like in a browser thing. this is something I did want to mention, but what could I?
How about census tracts?
Like, you could use census tracts as well. Let me see. Let me just undo something. Is this, let's see. I think if you're talking about something like this, is this what you're talking about? Where you can actually like click?
Yeah, there's all kinds of divisions of GIS that you might want to go after.
Right. So something like this, where it's a clickable thing like this, there's a little known there's a little known library in browsers that you can use to map out something like this and map out the points.
And are you adding map sources to Google Earth?
So this, you don't actually need an API to do this at all. What you need is just an image of the location that you're looking at. And then what you would do is you can plot out the points using the map API here. And then there's a shape that you can use the area. This is the thing that we're looking at. So using area, and then we can see that it says shape, and then polygon, and then coordinates, and it lists out all these coordinates. These are pixel coordinates within the picture that you want this shape to trace out. And so you would do this, and you don't actually have to finish it up. The last one will automatically connect to the first one. And by using this, you can map out the boundaries of the area.
One more question. Mm-hmm. If you were at a point in a zip code, you didn't know the zip code, and you queried for the zip code you were in, and then you said you wanted to identify adjacent zip codes and include them into your area of view, does that seem pretty reasonable?
So the problem with this is I'm not sure if there's an API that can pull out adjacent zip codes that easily. You could try to do something like, go up, +5 zip codes and go down +5 zip codes. That's a really rough solution, especially because, one of those zip codes could be way over there just because that's just the quirk of how the county decided this stuff. It's really hard to do. And the other problem that you're going to have is by whatever zip code that you have, you're going to have have one zip code and then 10 calculations if you're looking for the 10 closest zip codes. So you're going to have 10 calculations every time. So it's just like a lot of calculations that pile up if you do something like that. But you can, for sure, yeah. So you could do that. The way that you would do it, you might want to have a bunch of regex. That's the easiest solution that I can think of. Other than that, I think the only other way to do it is if you had trained something like an AI or something to extract entities. The only thing is I think that solution, the AI solution, is not yet here. But definitely, you could use regex to pull out names and stuff. That actually might be a good idea if you have been collecting a lot of address data and you haven't put it to use yet in your database. Another thing that I've seen that kind of removes the need for entity extraction or anything in a specific instance is if you're a newspaper, you're not exactly planning on implementing this right away, you could just save the data in a separate meta box anyway and remove the need for scrubbing data like that. But if you already have the data, definitely you could use some regex to do it. It's definitely possible, yeah.
I just want to mention another way to do the post-to-post connection is there's a plugin called post-to-post that does many-to-many between posts, so that way you don't have to worry about taxonomies and all that stuff. So that's another good way to do that.
That is true. That is a good way to do it. The only thing with post to post is also that it's when I've used it, it's been a little bit difficult to get the posts related posts to show up as in search results and things like that, to reconcile that. But definitely you could do it. I'm not too sure about. I mean, we have used it in big sites and it has been working so far. But I'm not too sure that I would definitely depend on it because taxonomies are already built in. And I would prefer to use the taxonomies instead. Yeah. It also has its own custom database tables, and for me, I would rather use WordPress's data structures whenever I can.
Just one thing I wanted to throw out there. So there's not a core field for CMB2 that does the mapping, but there is a plugin on GitHub that will add that, and then it just stores similar to what ACF does. It gives you the address, and then it gives you the points for latitude and longitude as well.
Yes. I didn't see that there was a plugin. That would have saved me some time. Thank you for letting me know.
I think we have time for one more quick one. Anything out there? Okay. In that case, thank you very much, Deepti.
All right.